Hi, I'm Sue Jones. I'm the Public Information Officer for the City of Victorville, and welcome to What's the TVV, our first ever podcast for the City of Victorville. We're going to take a deep dive into questions and issues of most importance to our community. Things like what projects are in the works for the City of Victorville, what goes into road repairs, and what attracts businesses like car washes to operate in our city. For our first podcast, we wanted to take a deep dive into the budget and how our money works. So Carmen, we're asked a lot about the city budget and how the money works. So it's wonderful to have you here. You are our finance director for the City of Victorville, and we're so excited to get to hear from you about just exactly that. How does the money work for the City of Victorville? I always say to people, because my profession is more in communication, I deal in words, not numbers. So what you do is just so challenging to me to think that I would be responsible for millions and millions of dollars. I think that's a huge responsibility, and kudos to you for doing that. What motivated you to go into such a profession?
I don't know if we're just born with A-type personality versus B-type. I'm quite the opposite, Sue. I've always felt comfortable with numbers. They make sense to me. I love that 2 + 2 is always 4. And I would say that unfortunately, I probably lack significantly on the creative side, but I'm very comfortable with facts, with black and white, with numbers. So I just think it's, you're one or the other.
Can you start by telling us how the city budget is allocated, like how much revenue we have and how much expenditures we have annually?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. This year, fiscal year 2025, we had an overall budget of just shy of $355 million for our revenues, and we did budget $377 million for our expenditures, and that does include just under $60 million for our capital improvement projects.
And capital improvement is like road construction?
Absolutely. So capital improvement can be a variety of things. It can be projects and purchases. So if it's equipment, vehicles, things that we need to run and move throughout the city, but yes, also projects. One of our very famous projects that we recently completed was the Green Tree Extension. So that's a wonderful example of a capital improvement project.
How is the money, would you say, how is it adopted, or who approves the city budget?
Well, every year as a city, every department begins to work on their budget based on their expertise. They will account into their budget various reports, whether that's a master report, service rates, etc. And once the city comes together with this budget, after we've reviewed it with our executives, with the various leadership teams, we do present it to our council. And ultimately, the council and our board of directors, as they serve with many hats, they're the ones who will approve the budget.
And what controls are in place to make sure that we're spending the money the way we were supposed to?
We have a multitude of controls. At a very basic level, we obviously have internal controls, so you would never have an employee that has access to processing an invoice, cutting a check, and going from A to Z for various reasons. But besides all of the internal controls and separation of duties that we have, we also have workflow established. So when something gets processed, when any financial transaction happens in our system, it goes through a multitude of approvals depending on the dollar amount. And it could be something as simple as just going through 2 or 3 approvals if it's a small dollar amount, all the way up to our city manager. So in addition to having multiple eyes on all of the transactions, we also hire an external independent third-party auditor every year. So on an annual basis, we are audited not only in our accounting methodology and our accounting entries, we're also audited in our internal controls, and they take a very large sample of our transactions. So at the end of this audit, our auditors do put out a report that is presented to our council, and they go through and ensure that anything that they feel we can enhance or improve on, we absolutely incorporate and move forward with.
That's great. And that's done annually?
Annually.
How have the audits been for the city the last couple of years?
We've been very fortunate. We have had clean audits. There has been some findings in areas that we can definitely improve on. And so the silver lining, I guess I can say, of having a couple of things being found is that where you need to improve, where to put your focus on, and where you can start to develop, whether that be policies or new practices. And so we want to make sure that we stay abreast of best business practices, and that we continue to really enforce and practice continual improvement.
Since we're talking about that because that kind of leads into transparency, can you tell me some of the ways that the city, communicates about the budget so that our community members can actually look at it themselves or check on it?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things we've recently done in the last couple of years the last 2 years actually, is we moved to a digital budget book, and that can be found on our website. And so what's really nice about this book is that it's interactive. You can drill down, you can actually go in and select a language. They have a multitude of various languages. So if you prefer Spanish or Vietnamese or any other language, that's definitely an option. So we're very proud of that. In addition to that, I would highly encourage our constituency, our Victorville residents, to participate and listen into our council meetings. In May and June, regularly, we have budget workshops where our city manager does a fabulous job of going in and really breaking down the next year's budget, and what we have planned for the city and how it all integrates into our strategic plan. So that would be a great base to really understand the foundation of our budget, I think. Additionally, as we have various council meetings, we have modifications to the budget, and a very good example would be we receive a grant.
So since you're talking about grants and things like that, how is it that the revenue for the city is developed? How are we getting money to help pay for the services we offer?
We have various ways to receive monies. On the general fund side, it's mainly property tax and sales tax. We have a Measure P that we can talk a little bit more about. And then we have what we call enterprise funds. And so the city has 84 funds. And some of those are enterprise funds, and those are mainly charges for services. So an example would be water. The City of Victorville provides water to all of our residents, and so that's a specific charge or a fee for that particular commodity. So depending on how the revenues come in and the type of fund is how we are really legally entitled to spend. There are a lot of rules that we must follow. And that's also part of the audit. They make sure that this money is meant to be spent in this particular method versus this one. And that's another check-in point that they do for us.
What is the difference between an enterprise fund and the general fund?
I would say that the biggest difference between enterprise and general fund is how we collect the revenues and how we spend the money. So with an enterprise fund, those revenues we receive are basically, or for the most part, are fees that we're charging for a particular service. Whereas with a general fund, the main source of revenue tends to be our property tax, our sales tax, some franchise fees and investments. So different types of revenue sources, right? And then again, how we spend it. We talked about the enterprise funds. You can think of them as, independent businesses. So just like with private industry, you can't commingle funds. It's the same thing here with these enterprise funds. Not only can we not commingle funds, it's very important that we spend the funds on the purpose of the fund. So water is a wonderful example. When we go out and we collect fees for the consumption of the water, for the monthly fee of providing that service, we can't take that money and spend it on building a new park or fixing roads. That money needs to stay within water to ensure that it's used to maintain the integrity of that infrastructure.
That's very interesting because I think people think things like that. Well, why don't you just go use the money for here? Why don't you go use the money for there? But it's all very highly regulated. It's restricted. It has to be used for its purpose.
And with the general fund, there's a little bit more flexibility in how we spend the revenues that we receive. So we can, as a city, look and say, well, this is a service that is needed, and we have flexibility and making sure that those funds are properly allocated as such.
There's a little more discretion.
There's much more discretion, I would say, yes.
And if I'm correct, a large percentage of the general fund has to go to things like public safety.
Correct. We have a very large percentage that goes into a general category we call contract services, and in that, yes, most of that does go to providing public safety. Mm-hmm. Contracting with our sheriffs, making sure that we have enough police for our growing community.
So another source of revenue is Measure P, and that's kind of a little more recent. Could you talk a little bit about Measure P?
Absolutely. So Measure P was passed by our voters I want to say about 4 years ago, and really started to go into effect 3 years ago. And what's nice about Measure P and the way that works is Measure P is a 1% tax increase. So it did take our sales tax from 7 3/4 to 8 3/4. And something that our residents may not know is when we receive sales tax, we're not receiving that full 7 3/4 cents. We only receive a very small fraction of that. Whereas with Measure P, we do receive 100% of that 1 cent. And while we think, well, what's 1 penny, right? It's been great to have. We're thrilled that our residents understood the need for that. So that 1%, we are estimating and forecasting that for fiscal year 25 would be right around $29 million. So again, thanks to that 1%, we can afford to hire the safety that we need to hire, whether that be with police, with our fire department, our code enforcement. We're also using quite a bit of those funds to establish an animal shelter, something that was completely unexpected just a year ago, but luckily we had the funds to move forward thanks to Measure P. And then of course provide other community benefits, whether it's to enhance our library or other recreational activities. So it's been a wonderful measure, and I think that when you compare the city of Victorville to other cities that didn't pass such a measure, you can definitely see the difference in services provided.
Yeah, it was so important because as a city, I think the stat was that our population doubled or more than doubled in just a 20-year period, but the revenue wasn't catching up. So we needed a way to expand services for our growing population, and we continue to grow.
It's significant growth, absolutely.
Another interesting thing is that none of your income tax comes to the city.
That's correct.
So we do not see any of that.
We do not.
How is the city doing financially?
Well, I'm very happy to report that we're financially in a very healthy state. The city has developed quite a few policies to help us stay in a healthy state, to help us progress into where we are today. The city does have a reserve policy for both the general fund and Measure P. And so what that requires is a 17% reserve. And luckily, we're much higher than that. So this reserve policy is basically meant to for a rainy day. As our executive team and our leadership team, we are constantly monitoring the landscape, changes in the economy, whether that be growth or downturn. There's so many factors that play into our expenditures, inflation, factors that we can't control. But what we can control is obviously how we manage the monies that we do have. And so having this reserve policy is really a safety net so that should something unexpected happen tomorrow, a natural disaster, just an unexpected turn in the economy, the city of Victorville can still be there to support and provide services to our residents.
That's wonderful to hear. When you were explaining a good example about like the water and water costs and so forth, or how much it costs to provide that service, is the city allowed to make a profit off of giving, such a service?
No, we don't make a profit. So there's a lot that goes into rates and deciding these fees. To start with, staff spends a significant amount of time and effort in maintaining the infrastructure and everything that's needed to provide services, whether that be sewer or water, et cetera. And so what we do for every year's budget is we look at the reports and the studies that are done. Again, for example, the water department. They're going to go out and they're going to create, they're going to work with a third-party consultant, experts, and say, here's all of our infrastructure. Let's create a master plan that lets us know what are the things that we really need to upgrade and change in the next 10 to 15 years. And even though this plan is laid out for 10, 15, 20 years, we still go through and we renew these plans every 5 because unexpected things happen. And this is basically going to create the foundation of your CIP or your capital improvement projects for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And that is a piece of cost, right? That is one component of your cost. And then what they'll do is they'll take this master plan and they're going to go ahead and feed it into a rate study, if you will. And a rate study can be quite complex. There's a lot of additional costs costs that go into a rate study, your operations and maintenance, your personnel cost, any reserve policies that are required that we need to account for, etc. And then breaking up these costs, right? Which costs really are only associated maybe with commercial customers versus residents. We don't want one category of customers subsidizing costs for the other. So it's imperative that all of these items are looked at, they're analyzed, and then we come up with the rate plan for the next 5 years or so. And so that's really how, rates are created, and the whole purpose of these rates is not to make a profit, but to stabilize revenues, to ensure that we have enough revenue coming in, again, to continue to maintain the infrastructure, to continue to maintain those capital improvement projects that are needed.
Prices are never going to stay the same.
Correct.
And as consumers, that can be frustrating. Why is it that the cost goes up? What is making some of the costs go up?
Well, our rates have to increase because of, there's a few main factors, I would say. One is obvious, it's inflation. I think we all experienced, especially after COVID, how many items were unavailable. That created a spike in prices and overall inflation. Again, something that we can't control, but we still need to acquire the necessary equipment and supplies and commodities that we need to be able to provide the services that our constituents are expecting. But in addition to that, there's other factors that we may not necessarily know are coming down the pipeline. We might find out of a brand new legislation that, the state of California or the federal government decides is going to be implemented. Unfunded mandates, things of that nature. And so we need to account for these mandates, these new legislation, and depending on what they require, it can mean that the city is forced to hire more workforce to ensure that we meet those requirements. And then also, obviously, we purchase the commodity. So if we're supplying our citizens with water or industrial parks with electricity and gas, we have to purchase those commodities. So if there's an increase in that, ultimately it's going to increase our rates.
Mm-hmm. And a good example of an unfunded state mandate would be like organics recycling.
That's the best, most recent example. Mm-hmm. I think everybody in the city of Victorville now has a green can and has received the mailings of, how important it is to put in, organics into these cans. That's a great example of a mandate that we didn't expect. And so we have to comply with state law, and that's an added cost.
Well, from where I sit, you're absolutely very well spoken, and you've taken a really complex topic and boiled it down, I think, to its essence for us. The numbers and the budget, it's a big thing to try to understand. So we really appreciate you taking the time to talk it through with us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed this, and I do think that everybody should dive in and read our budget book. I'm very proud of it. I think staff citywide has done a tremendous job. And I think it's great to understand, where's my tax money going? And then that way they really understand, wow, there's a lot of money coming in, but there's a lot of money going out to fix, to build, to provide services. So it's very informative.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's just the nerd in me. But
supporting local businesses is an important part of our strategic plan to have a thriving economy in the city of Victorville. One way we support our local businesses is through our MyBizDV social media drawing. Each month, we invite licensed Victorville businesses to enter the drawing by following our Facebook or Instagram and commenting on our posts using the hashtag MyBizDV that answers the question of the month. The winner will receive a fully produced promo video to use in promoting their business, valued at $2,000. We'll also post the video to our social media pages and highlight it in our newsletter. Be sure to keep an eye out on our social media pages. Our next winner could be you.
It's time for our City of Victorville News Roundup. Our 2024 Concerts in the Park series and Victorville Sings competition came to a close last month with Leilani being crowned this year's champion. We had such a great time hosting our community and can't wait for more musical fun next year. There were a number of new business developments throughout the city recently. We welcomed our second Superior Grocers to Victorville in July. The new store is located on Bear Valley Road in the location formerly occupied by Albertsons. We are very happy to see this space occupied and to see the economic boons Superior Grocers will bring the area. We are also looking forward to a new retail development planned for Roy Rogers Drive that will include a Raising Cane's and Tractor Supply. On the industrial side, Goodyear Tire recently broke ground on a new 1.3 million square foot distribution facility at our Southern California Logistics Airport. The Goodyear Tire facility will be located next to the Amazon distribution facility that opened last year. Finally, the Victorville Planning Commission approved the development of a warehouse park to be located on 81 acres at the corner of Mojave Drive and Topaz Road. The facility will include 3 warehouse buildings with tenants to be determined. Our Homelessness Solutions staff recently released the second quarter report for our Wellness Center. The center is averaging 137 occupants, and 34 individuals have transitioned to permanent housing since operations began. Our Bear Valley Road reconstruction project between Amethyst and Highway 395 was completed last month. This 2-mile stretch of road improvement is part of our strategic goal to maintain our city infrastructure. Construction is continuing to progress on our new city library to be located at the Green Tree Golf Course. Thanks to a $9 million grant from the state of California, we are adding 5,000 square feet of additional space to the clubhouse building, doubling the size of our current city library. We expect construction to be complete in October 2025. Mark your calendars for our annual Fall Festival scheduled for Saturday, October 5th. This event, located on Civic Drive in front of City Hall, is the region's largest street fair experience, featuring live music, kids' activities and rides, a marketplace, and great food and drink.
Welcome to Council Corner, our roundup of noteworthy council items from the past month. At our council meeting, July 16th, the City Council approved the purchase of a new tactical water tender for our Victorville Fire Department. The new tender will hold 1,800 gallons of water to help the department fight wildland and vegetation fire. The tender is very important in environments without access to fire hydrants. The new tender will cost just over $509,000 and will replace the department's 28-year-old tender, which only holds 1,000 gallons. We are continuing to move forward with our plans for a new Victorville police station, and we received some financial assistance from the County of San Bernardino. At the July 16th council meeting, Dakota Higgins from Supervisor Paul Cook's office presented the council with a check for $3.7 million to cover the cost of land acquisition and design for the new police station that will be located on Civic Drive near City Hall in the vacant land across from the car dealerships. The new police station is needed to fulfill our goal of adding to our police force. The next city council meeting will be August 20th at 6 p.m.
Now that we have a general understanding of how our city budget works, we're going to take a look at the budget in action, specifically how we use our city budget to repair our roads. And joining us today is our city engineer, Fredy Bonilla.
Thank you, Sue. It's a pleasure to be here today with you.
What made you want to be a city engineer?
I loved math and science growing up, and I always wanted to build structures, bridges, roads, buildings, and civil engineering was a passion of mine. So I went to school, I got my bachelor's and my master's degree, and I haven't looked back. I enjoy everything that I do here.
So Fredy, we get a lot of questions about our roads. Can you tell us a little bit about why it's a challenge to fix our city streets?
Our challenge is that Victorville is a really big city, 74 square miles, almost 500,000 square feet of pavement. And so when you look at how big our city is, we just don't have enough funds to be able to repave every road the way we all would like to do. Additionally, we do not have a local source of revenue. We are dependent on the state in the form of gas tax, as well as the county, which is a 0.5 cent sales tax that every resident pays countywide. And so when you add it up, we have very limited dollars. It's approximately about $10 million that we have for pavement rehab projects.
So when you look at that allocation, is that all going to repair? Is some of it also going to new roads? How does that work out in the budget?
So new roads are typically built by developers. Green Tree Extension is something that was not the norm Typically, a road like that would be built by development and it's development driven. So the vast majority of those funds actually go towards the operations and maintenance of our existing roadway infrastructure. When you look at that $10 million budget, about $3.5 million gets allocated to personnel, maintenance, and operations of our existing roadway. So that would be like our public works department going out and filling potholes, sealing cracks. And the vast majority of it, about 70% of it, actually goes towards projects, repaving roads and doing rehabilitation citywide.
So I know from time to time we look at the condition of the roadways. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
We actually hire a consultant that comes out and does what we call a pavement condition index. It's a survey of all of our roadways citywide. It's done in 3 phases. So year 1, we do a third of the city. Year 2, we do this another third, and then we finish it off in year 3. And those results are typically good for about 3 years. We use that to rate our roads. And basically, it's a planning tool to tell us where we get the maximum benefit for the limited dollars that we have.
And so do you use that then to pick which roads are you going to pick to fix with this limited budget?
So we have a formula that we use. It's a cost to benefit ratio. We look at PCI. Obviously, the worse the road, the higher the benefit. We look at the annual traffic. So, a road like Bear Valley Road, which is under construction right now, has a very high traffic daily count. It was in poor shape, so it's going to calc out really well on our cost benefit formula. The local road in front of my house may not do as well because only me and my 20 neighbors are going to enjoy it. So even though that cost may be small, the cost to benefit ratio is fairly small when you compare it to the larger roads. That is why roads like Mojave Drive, Bear Valley Road will always get the vast majority of the available funding.
So right now the city is repairing this 2-mile stretch of Bear Valley Road. For example, how much is that project costing us?
Right now it's costing us about $7.8 million. So if you were to add up the available budget that we have in the form of SB1 funds from the state of California, and that's basically the fuel tax that every consumer pays at the pump, as well as the Measure I funds that we get from the county, San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, it would exceed our annual allocation, just that project alone. What facilitated this project is that we essentially saved our Measure I funds for 2 years before we advertised Bear Valley, and that allowed us to be able to complete such a vast project within 1 calendar year.
Why is it so expensive, Fredy?
The cost of roadway reconstruction has pretty much increased almost 30% in the last couple of years. And the rate that our available funds from the state, gas tax as well as Measure I they grow incrementally every year, but they don't grow enough to be able to keep up with the pace of the rising cost of construction.
So Fredy, why can't we just take money from another source?
I wish I could do that. Unfortunately, some of our enterprise funds are tied to a specific improvement. For example, the water funds that our ratepayers pay go to the operation, construction, and maintenance of the water system. It would be illegal for me to take those funds and use them to fix roads. We are limited in what we can do. Ultimately, I think the solution is going to be a local revenue that we could use specifically for roadway projects, because right now, as I mentioned earlier, we're dependent on the state and the county to be able to provide that for us.
So we hear from our community members sharing their concerns about the condition of our city streets. And I know you talked about the study that you've gone out and looked at, our various streets and the condition. If we were to bring all the city streets up to an acceptable level, how much would that cost us?
Well, what I would say is actually our roadway system is in pretty good shape. If you look at the 74 square miles of the city, the average PCI index is about 67 right now.
So in my household, a 67 is considered a failing grade, Fredy. So some might not think that's so great, but to put it in context, could you compare that to other cities around us?
I would say 67 is very good. Most cities strive to be at that 70 mark. It would be almost impossible to be at a PCI of 75. It would require a significant capital investment that most cities, Victorville is not unique in that we all struggle with the same thing. We all have a large roadway network, limited dollars, so we need to prioritize how we do our projects, and that's exactly what that cost benefit formula does for us. To be able to get all of our roads to a PCI of above 70, so that would be a significant capital investment, we're looking at a project, the size of about $150 million in today's dollars. So when our available funding is a little over $7 million, it's very difficult to be able to do that.
And you're talking a little bit about what goes into a road construction project. Is accessibility an important part of that?
Accessibility is a huge part of that because that's how our patrons can, or our residents can walk and mobilize themselves that are not in a vehicle. For example, in our Bear Valley Road project, in addition to doing pavement rehab, we also constructed some curbs, reconstructed some curb ramps to make them accessible to today's standards for accessibility. And there was a portion of Bear Valley Road which was previously developed that never had sidewalk between Bermuda and Cobalt Road. So we took this opportunity to be able to construct that sidewalk. There are portions of Bear Valley Road that are undeveloped, and ultimately when those properties develop, the property owner or developer will construct those frontage improvements. But where we could, we constructed significant portions of sidewalk on Bear Valley Road.
Are we putting that accessibility into like all the big major projects?
Yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. When we do major road repairs like that, and we have a couple in design right now, Mojave Drive, Roy Rogers Drive, Ridgecrest Road, and another portion of Bear Valley Road west of Highway 395. We try to replace curb ramps and add sidewalk. In fact, we just completed a pretty big grant application to the state to be able to fully develop Mojave Drive along the north side to full standard. So an additional lane of travel, curb and gutter, sidewalk, street lighting, all along developed parcels. That's really the trigger for us, because if the parcels are undeveloped, we'll let the developers and property owners do their fair share, if you will, for the frontage improvements. But if the properties have already been developed, it falls on the city to construct that. So we're always looking at grant opportunities to be able to do that. And so in addition to that grant that we submitted to the state, we've been very successful at submitting grants to the county. Last year, we actually completed the first phase of our Old Town Sidewalk project, where we installed 11 missing segments of sidewalk in Old Town. We're currently designing the second phase, which will install additional sidewalk at 9 different separate locations. And we also have a project that's budgeted for Village Drive between Puesta del Sol and Tawny Ridge. So the city is very aggressive with our grant applications, but we don't have a specific funding set aside for sidewalk projects. So in order to be able to maximize the limited Measure I funds that we have to seek grant applications. That's how we augment what we're able to do.
So Fredy, if a community member notices a road in need of repair, what action should they take to tell the city about it?
Let us know. I mean, civic engagement is very important. We have a general idea of how our roadway system is. I've talked about the pavement management software that we have. But really, if one of our residents sees that something is wrong with their road, they should call us and let us know. Our typical response is for our public works department to go out. There'll certain things that we can do in-house, filling up potholes, sealing cracks. But if the extent of the repairs is so much that it cannot be done with in-house staff, then they usually recommend it to us, and then we start reviewing it and putting it into our capital plan so that it may not happen right away, but at least we're putting it into the plan so that we can do that cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, we often say around here, if you see something, say something. And we really want to know about citizens' concerns so that we can address them.
Absolutely, 100%. Let us know. That way, we can do something about it.
Yeah, and oftentimes you're going to see it first in your neighborhood before we do.
Yes, very much so.
Fredy, thank you so much for joining us and talking about our roads and the budget. You really simplified a really complex topic and brought it down to where we can understand it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. What's the TVV is produced by the City of Victorville. If you have a topic you would like to see on future episodes, leave a comment or review on your preferred platform.